magic trick from a man who's produced a lot of magic in music.
It wasn't, he was such a leading figure, not just in terms of music and songs that he wrote, but the different persona that he created for his music. And in fact, we're just looking at pictures of him now on the Aladdin Sane tour of his quite sort of sometimes shocking wardrobe.
Shocking, yeah. Well, stylishly, he was advanced. You know, pop music gets bored very quickly. It's a neophyte thing. It's all about what's new. And he was one of the people that really understood that to maintain interest, you had to keep moving, you had to keep pushing somewhere new. He kind of understood the game, I think, a bit deeper and faster and quicker than almost anybody else. He is... You know, pop has been this great story of the last 50 years, of the end of the second half of the 20th century. It's been the great cultural movement of young people, and he has been one of the foremost figures, not because he was this huge seller, like he wasn't the Beatles. They just fizz with ideas. It's just kind of mind-blowing. It's one of the most exciting moments in musical history. There's very few artists that have attained that kind of level of activity. You know, he's right up there with the top of great pop artists ever. And he continued making really fascinating music all through his life. And therefore, for that reason, he became a marker to all artists about the possibility of what you can do with this music, which is supposed to be, you know, trivial youth throwaway music, but not in the hands. I mean, in his hands, he made it art. He's one of the great artists of pop culture.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, so many different phases of his music. Do any of them particularly stand out above the others?
Yeah, I think the early glam rock period, which is, you know, Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane, is, you know, absolutely mind-blowing, and Ziggy Stardust remains, you know, one of the greatest records ever made. And then there's all the 70s stuff, in fact. You know, there's the fantastic kind of young American station period when he's playing soul music, really soulful. And then the end of the 70s when he...
which would both entrance and bewilder his fans. Born David Jones in South London, he performed both music and mime before a psychedelia-tinged folk number gave him his first major hit. A subsequent album, Hunky Dory, spawned this hit single, with what was to become a trademark video. But it was the incarnation of Ziggy Stardust, the androgynous bisexual rock star from another planet, which brought him star status and broke him in America. Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with weird.
I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else, and it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character.
A move to America brought Bowie into contact with the New York art rock movement and performers like Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. Tiring of American excess, he moved to Germany, where he teamed up with the avant-garde musician Brian Eno. He also produced a series of innovative videos which helped fuel the MTV generation. Let's Dance became his most successful album, thanks to stylish videos for Let's Dance and China Girl, which turned both songs into top 10 hits. He was not, however, entirely comfortable with his commercial success.
Artistically and aesthetically, it was probably my lowest point.
He saw the potential of the internet to deliver music very early on, releasing his single Lies from the Earthling album as a download. It was another example of how this multi-talented performer was always ready to strike out in new directions and reinvent both himself and his music.
So Mark Radcliffe there. Let's speak to BBC Radio 6 music presenter Chris Hawkins, who joins us now. Shocking and surprising news in so many ways. What's your thoughts?
Well, there have been rumours for well over a year that he was unwell, but it doesn't take away from the shock at all of today, particularly in view of him turning 69 last Friday and releasing this absolutely brilliant new album. Remembering that he's 69, releasing another groundbreaking album just last Friday. That album, Black Star, I listened to it maybe 3 or 4 times over the weekend. And then the shock this morning, it's horrible.
I mean, he's one of those people whose career lasted so long that you could be of quite a wide age span and have your favourite moments from what was an extraordinary career.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that he is one of the most important musicians in the history of music. I think he's been that significant in what he's done, in the way that he's been groundbreaking, a pioneer, always at the cutting edge, and also a cultural and style icon, as well as this terrific musician.
That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, we're just looking at some of the pictures of him here. I mean, just extraordinarily original, wasn't he?
Yeah, and always pushing boundaries. The alter egos, the Thin White Duke, the Ziggy Stardust. No one had done that before. Almost every album was completely original, something new, not just one that followed on from what had gone before. There was always something incredible about the work he did with Brian Eno in terms of electronic music. He became one of the most important electronic musicians of his time then. And now this most recent record, he cited Kendrick Lamar, a hugely important and young contemporary artist, as an influence on this new record of his.
He was a master at something that had never been done before, which is the fusion of sort of theatre, drama, and music. Because you mentioned those persona when he started with Ziggy Stardust, then what Aladdin Sane became. Then you mentioned the Thin White Duke. He loved that sense of theatre on stage.
Yeah, he was a showman, wasn't he? You know, his music was incredible. The songwriting, second to none. But that delivery of his, that voice of his, so distinctive, so important. It's horrifically sad news today. What a massive loss to music.
And you were the lucky ones who actually saw him play.
Thank you.
Chris Hawkins remembering David Bowie, and we will continue paying tribute to David Bowie throughout this morning and talking about him as well.
Let's take a moment, though, with the time coming up to 7:45, to catch up with the rest of the morning's news. And United Nations.
If you take this assignment, you'll have complete authority.
His time in America also saw his first film role in The Man Who Fell to Earth, Nick Rogue's tale of an alien visitor. It was perfect casting.
Buy some of mine. Buy it? And it costs naturally.
He also produced a series of innovative videos which helped fuel the MTV generation. Let's Dance became his most successful album, thanks to stylish videos for Let's Dance and China Girl, which turned both songs into top 10 hits. He was not, however, entirely comfortable with his commercial success.
Artistically and aesthetically, it was probably my lowest point.
I don't need any help. Let's do it. I've practiced walking for years.
His music career stalled in the mid-80s, although he won critical acclaim for his role as a prisoner of war in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
I don't need that.
Musically, the decade ended with Tin Machine, a short-lived and critically panned 4-piece rock band. The 1990s saw a revival. He saw the potential of the internet to deliver music very early on, releasing his single Lies from the Earthling album as a download. It was another example of how this multi-talented performer was always ready to strike out in new directions and reinvent both himself and his music.
So many people talking about David Bowie this morning. I'm just going to read some of the tributes. The comedian Eddie Izzard tweeting that through his music, he will live forever.
David Cameron's called Bowie a pop genius and said the singer's death was a huge loss.
Brian Eno, who collaborated with him on his Low and Heroes album, said, "Words cannot express. Rest in peace, David Bowie."
Kanye West said, David Bowie was one of my most important inspirations, so fearless, so creative. He gave us magic for a lifetime.
And BBC Six Music's Lauren Laverne said, "Still in shock. This is a huge loss to everyone who loves music."
Well, here with us this morning, our arts correspondent Colin Patson and Chris Hawkins from Rick Six Music. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Colin, most of us knew that he wasn't well, but this has still come as a great shock.
A huge shock. I mean, he had sort of withdrawn from public life. That's why there was such excitement in 2013 when on his birthday he dropped that surprise single from the Next Day album. He released that album, it got to #1, and he just had this album, Black Star, that was released on Friday.
Again on his birthday.
On his birthday, getting these fantastic reviews. But I think it's hard to underemphasize just what an important artist David Bowie was. When you look at what he achieved in such a short time, from starting out at the end of the 60s, he was a folk artist. Then he managed to pretty much tap into the very start of glam rock with things like Ziggy Stardust. Then he moved into tapping into American soul with Young Americans. Then he went off to Berlin and made this incredibly dense, introspective trio of albums with Brian Eno. And then at the start of the 80s, he thought, you know what, I'll just become the biggest pop star in the world. And he teamed up with Nile Rodgers and made the Let's Dance album. That is like a 13 or 14-year period. I mean, to go through all those incarnations at that time, the Thin White Duke, Ziggy Stardust, I mean, just phenomenal.
And that sort of seems, I mean, there's so many things that come out, aren't there, this morning, Chris, but the theme of innovation and constant making a difference.
Yeah, a pioneer in so many ways that Colin's described. And I think you read a tweet from my colleague at Six Music, Lauren Laverne, saying that music has lost someone so incredibly important, perhaps the singular most important artist in our time. I think that's probably fair to say. He was an innovator. He was groundbreaking. And as much of a brilliantly talented musician as a cultural icon too. He was wearing makeup on top of the pops before many others were doing that.
That's very true. It looked like he'd come from outer space, basically, in the 70s.
Landed from another planet.
And brought forward all these issues, like you say, with cross-dressing. He wore a dress on the front of one of his albums.
His best, the culmination, I think, in many people's eyes, of all that had gone before. Right at the top of his game, right to the very end.
Am I right in saying, Colin, that he was a pretty private man, actually?
Very much withdrew from public life over the last 10 years or so. You hardly even got photos of him. Lived in New York with his wife, the supermodel Iman. Very seldom gave interviews at all. And the big thing was people kept wondering if he would go on tour again. And of course now he had a heart attack on stage in Norway in the 2000s, and after that never did a full tour again. I think his last ever appearance was at a Syd Barrett's tribute at the Royal Albert Hall, where he came on and sang a couple of old Pink Floyd songs. I think that was
that's right. You have to remember, in terms of those live performances, remember Live Aid. You know, that was something else. That I think the epitome of this brilliant performance.
I was lucky enough to see him at Hammersmith Apollo.
Stated to wake up to this news this morning, not least because I bought Black Star yesterday and was listening to it for most of the day. David Bowie was a polymath, of course, although he was best known for his music, for his records. Let's not forget that he was a pretty good actor as well. He was a painter. He was a mime. He was a stage actor. I was lucky enough in 1979 to go to Chicago and watch him perform as David Merrick, the Elephant Man, on stage in Chicago when I took some journalists to interview him there. He was an immensely likable man as well. If you had the good fortune to meet him, he just oozed charisma and was very friendly, and he was also very, very bright. He knew an awful lot about all sorts of subjects, and he was a terrific interviewee. During the early part of the 70s, I was on the staff of Melody Maker, and that was when I first met him. And
And he was absolutely terrific to interview because he'd give good quotes, you know. He might not necessarily tell the truth, of course, but what does that matter if you're looking for a headline?
Oh, that's very interesting. You've been listening, as you said, to Black Star, and the lyrics are particularly poignant, given
Indeed,
now what we know.
Indeed, I was listening to it yesterday afternoon without, obviously knowing anything about his death. It seems almost like, and I don't want this to sound wrong, that this was the last great PR stunt of his life, that no one knew about this. Although in truth, people might have guessed because he was a very, very heavy smoker for most of his life. And if you recall, 3 years ago when his last album was released, the world knew nothing about it until the day it was released. And that in itself was a news story. And now his death is, it's his death.
Thank you for paying a tribute to David Bowie.
And that's what we're reporting on this morning, the death of David Bowie from cancer at the age of 69.
Right now, we'll be back with the headlines in just a couple of moments, but right now we're going to catch up with the... Hello, welcome back. This is Breakfast with Bill Turnbull and Louise Minchin.
Our main news this morning, just 3 days ago, he released his 28th album, Black Star. But this morning it's been confirmed that the rock singer David Bowie has died. He was 69.
Yes, his publicist said in a statement that he had passed away peacefully following a courageous 18-month battle with cancer. David Bowie's son, the film director, Duncan Jones, said the news was sad but true.
Well, in a career spanning 4 decades, he continually reinvented himself and his music. He also starred in 3 major feature films and pioneered the use of videos to promote his music. Mark Radcliffe takes a look now at his life.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do.
When Bowie made this announcement in 1973, many in the audience assumed he was quitting music. But it was only his alter ego Ziggy Stardust who bowed out that night.
This is ground control to Major Tom.
It was just the first of a series of changes of persona which would both entrance and bewilder his fans. Born David Jones in South London, he performed both music and mime before a psychedelia-tinged folk number gave him his first major hit. A subsequent album, Hunky Dory, spawned this hit single, with what was to become a trademark status and broke him in America.
Ziggy play guitar, jamming good with weird.
I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else. And it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character.
Time is waiting.
A move to America brought Bowie into contact with the New York art rock movement and performers like Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. Tiring of American excess, he moved to Germany, where he teamed up with the avant-garde musician Brian Eno. Let's Dance became his most successful album, thanks to stylish videos for Let's Dance and China Girl, which turned both songs into top 10 hits. He was not, however, entirely comfortable with his commercial success.
Artistically and aesthetically, it was probably my lowest point.
He saw the potential of the internet to deliver music very early on, releasing his single Lies from the Earthling album as a download. It was another example of how this multi-talented performer was always ready to strike out in new directions and reinvent both himself and his music.
David Bowie, who's died at the age of 69.
Many people paying tribute to him this morning. We'll just tell you about some of them. The comedian Eddie Izzard tweeted that through his music he will live forever. The Prime Minister called him a pop genius and said the singer's death was a huge loss.
Brian Eno, who collaborated with David Bowie on his albums Low and Heroes, said words cannot express. Rest in peace, David Bowie.
Kanye West has said, my most important inspirations, so fearless, so creative, he gave us magic for a lifetime.
And BBC Six Music's Lauren Laverne said, still in shock, this is a huge loss to everyone who loves music.
Well, let's get a little bit more right now from Lisa Ronson, musician, daughter of Nick Ronson, who worked with David Bowie. Morning to you. I understand you knew him. Just tell us a little bit about him.
Good morning. I didn't actually work with him. I just need to clarify that. And I didn't really know him very well, to be honest. But of course, it's a huge shock. I'm completely in shock this morning, and I had.
Does he like to work with?
Well, he's a tremendously creative, man. I know he had creativity pouring out of him. I know that my dad was, hugely influenced by him, and really enjoyed working with him. What a great person to work with.
And Lisa, would it be right in saying that you sound quite emotional this morning? Was it a shock to you, like so many other people as well?
Absolutely, complete shock. I just can't believe that he's gone. It's so soon. I know that he wasn't a very young man, but I think that he's still quite young to pass away.
And just tell us, he was so influential over his career. In your view, what were sort of the most important moments, do you think, and things that he did?
Morning.
Let's speak a little bit to our arts